Hello and welcome to World of Tanks. This is going to be part 1 of my introduction series to World of Tanks. It's a terrific game and I'll show you why. World of Tanks focuses on the development of tanks from a very early stage to a very late stage. You start at tier 1 or level 1 as it's called and progress through the game. It will take you months to get up to tier 10. Unless you're a full-time gamer, it might take you a few days or weeks. And of course there's a lot of fun you can have on your way there, and I'm going to show you how to make the most of it. World of Tanks is a free game. You don't have to pay a thing to download it and play it. The only thing you have to do is sign up for a free account and download the game. And of course there's an option to pay for the game as well, but you don't actually have to. And when you decide to spend money on this game, there's two different ways to do that. You can either have premium time or premium tanks, or both, of course. Premium time is like a VIP account in any other game. It will grant you a 50% boost in your income and in your experience earned per battle. Meaning you will be able to progress through the game a lot faster, but it won't grant you extra benefits per battle. Unlike a lot of other games where you get extra weapons, extra armor, better consumables, and it will just be unfair to players who don't pay for the game. This game is different in that aspect. So while it definitely gives the player with the premium account some benefits over players who don't pay for the game, it won't be an unfair game. Players with a free account can still develop from tier 1 to tier 10 and use all the tanks on the way. So when you downloaded the game and opened your account, you will start with 7 different tier 1 tanks. I only have 2 left. I sold the rest of them because I developed beyond them. I actually developed beyond these 2 that I still have left as well, but I decided to keep them, or actually rebuy them some time ago. As you can see, these tanks don't really look like modern tanks. It's more like a tractor with a turret mounted on top of it and a machine gun sticking out in front of it. But from here, your journey through the game will start. If you push this button, the research button, you'll see that this is your tank, and this first line here is the equipment that's fitted on it, or the modules that are fitted on it when you start. The first gun, the first turret, the first radio, or actually signal flags, it wasn't even a radio back then, the first engine and the first set of tracks. So from here on you can start developing your tank. And when you look at the characteristics of the first set of tracks, you can see that it's got a traverse speed of 35 degrees a second. So that's how fast it turns. It's got a load limit of 7.6 tons. If you look at the second set of tracks, you can see that it's a little bit better than the first set of tracks. The traverse speed has gone up 4 degrees a second, and the load limit is slightly higher as well. Meaning that you can add better guns, better turret and better equipment on it. If you look at the guns, you can see that there's 4 different guns to choose from. There's the first 37mm gun, which has a rate of fire of 24 shots a minute, with a armor penetration of 28mm, and it will do an average damage of 30 hit points per shot fired. That's an average, and the penetration is an average as well. It can deviate 25% either way, so it can be 25% higher or 25% lower. This is also an important value. It states the dispersion rate. If you fire at a target 100 meters away, your shot might land 54 centimeters outside of the reticle where you're aiming at. And there's the aiming time of 2.5 seconds, which is not bad at all. If you look at the second gun, it's a semi-automatic gun. It's a different gun, completely. The caliber is the same, but it's an autoloader. It's got 5 shells in a magazine, and it'll only take half a second to load the next shell. So in 2 seconds you can fire 5 shells, which of course is very quickly. As you can see, the penetration values have gone up, the damage is still the same, and the dispersion rate has gone down, which is good. Aiming time is still the same at 2.5 seconds. Then there's the third gun. It's also a 37mm semi-automatic gun. It's still got 5 shells in a magazine and half a second between firing each shell. So it's still 5 shots fired in 2 seconds. And as you can see, the penetration value has gone up even more. The dispersion rate has gone down even more. So this gun will perform a lot better than the first gun. And then there's the last gun you can develop on this tank. It's a 20mm. It's got 15 shells in a magazine with a 1/10 of a second reload time. So in 1.4 seconds you can fire 15 shots. But since the caliber is only 20mm, you will do a lot less damage per shot. But if you hit all those shots, you'll do a lot more damage than with the other guns. Though the penetration rate has gone down again, so there is a big chance that you won't be able to penetrate all the shots you fire. The dispersion rate has gone up a little bit, but the aiming time has gone down. This is the gun I'm using in my tank, and I can tell you from experience this is a very nice gun to have on it, but you won't be able to penetrate a lot of tanks from the front. From the sides and rear, however, you can really wreck them with your 15 shells doing 12 damage per shot. It's enough to kill a lot of the tier 1 tanks in one go. So and when you've developed all these different modules down here, you see that you can progress to tier 2. There's 4 different types of tanks here. As you can see, there's a medium tank up here, there's a light tank down here, there's a tank destroyer here, and an artillery. Needless to say, every type of tank has a different playstyle. In general, the medium tanks have a better armor than the light tanks. Light tanks are quicker, medium tanks have bigger guns. Tank destroyers have even bigger guns, but they have less good armor and they are not as maneuverable. And then there's artillery, which is fire support at range. They all play very differently and have a very different playstyle, and it's a very important topic to cover, and that's why it's going to be mentioned in our next episode. If you look at the tech tree, you might be wondering to yourself, is there a good place to start and a bad place to start? Yes, there is. Which country is best to start with? We'll talk about that the next few minutes. So if you look at the Chinese, you can immediately notice that it's only one tank line up to tier 5. Only at tier 6 do you get to choose which tank you want to go to next. The Chinese are well known for having low accuracy, low penetration value, but a very high alpha damage. Alpha damage, by the way, is the amount of damage you do with the first shot you fire. As opposed to DPM, which is damage per minute, the total amount of damage you can do in 1 minute. So guns with a high alpha damage might have a low DPM, and guns with a low alpha damage might have a high DPM. That's about what I showed you in a T1 Cunningham, where the last gun has the least alpha damage but the highest DPM. If you fire all those shots and you hit them all, you have a higher DPM than with the other guns. Next to that, the Chinese are also known for having a poor gun depression, so that means that your gun can't fire down at a very big angle. You have to fire level or up, but you can't fire down. So it might be a problem when you're shooting down at enemies. You might not be able to hit them, or you have to expose too much of your tank to shoot down at them, and you might be destroyed before you get a good shot in. For this reason, and also for the reason that there's not much choice in the tank lines, the Chinese tanks aren't a good place to start with. The Chinese tanks are better suited for experienced players who know how to cope with that. And so we come to the next country, which is France. And if you're looking at this, you might wonder, why isn't there an extra line here? If I look at my tech tree, there's an extra line. Well, I'm making this video in World of Tanks 9.6. 9.7 is around the corner, and there will be more French tanks added to it. The French tech tree features some of the nicest and well-loved tanks in the game. But it's not a good place to start. And why is that? Well, first of all, because the French tech tree is somehow, I think you can best describe it as an inconsistent tech tree. I'll tell you what I mean by that. So first you start with this tier 1, the Renault FT. That's a tier 1 tank, and there's not much to be said about that. Then you move on to the H35, which is a light tank, but it doesn't have very high speed, and it does have a reasonable armor for a light tank, as is the same with the AMX-38. The AMX-40 has better armor than the B1, which is classified as a heavy tank, but this is a light tank. As you can see in the description here, it says that the top speed is 50 kilometers an hour. It will never make that unless you drop it off a bridge. The armor is very good and very bouncy. I even got a steel wall in it, meaning that I received the highest potential damage in a battle, and a lot of shots bounced off my armor, and that with a light tank. That's just not common. So it doesn't play like a light tank at all. But then when you're just getting used to that, you move on to the next tank, which is the ELC AMX. It's one of the most loved tanks in the game. And that is because it is very quick. You can see it can make 65 kilometers an hour, and it will really do that speed. It's got the lowest profile of all tanks in the game, meaning that your enemies will have a hard time hitting you, especially because a low profile combined with a high speed makes for a target that is very hard to aim at and hit. But as you can understand, it's a very different style of play compared to the first few tanks in the light tank tree. Then you move on to the next one in the tech tree, which is the AMX-12T, and it's still a very quick tank. It's a little less quick, but its profile is a lot bigger, and since it's equipped with an autoloader, you'll have to get used to another playstyle again. You can fire 6 shots really quickly with 2.22 seconds in between each shot, so in about 10 seconds or 11 seconds you can fire 6 shots, but then you'll have to reload for 20 seconds and really hide your tank, because it's a light tank. Once you get hit, you might explode. So as you can see, the light tank line in the French tech tree, it is somewhat inconsistent. You have to change your playstyle with every tank. It doesn't really develop from one tank to a better version of the previous tank. It just changes your game style completely. If you look at the B1, it's the same story here. You start with a light tank, move up to a medium tank, and move up to a heavy tank. Though it has got the classification a heavy tank, it is actually a very big medium tank. The armor is not good at all, and the guns aren't very good as well. And though it is the first heavy tank in the game, together with the DW2, the German heavy tank at tier 4, it doesn't really play like a heavy tank. It doesn't have a lot of armor, and on top of that you don't get a good gun as well. The gun does fire relatively quick, but it doesn't do a lot of damage, and it doesn't have very high penetration value as well. So then when you move up to the BDR G1B, that is a heavy tank. It's got a good gun, it's got reasonable armor, and it's overall a nice tank, though it looks like a toy tank. And if you look at the ARL-44, it's got the same gun as the BDR G1B, so it isn't really an improvement in tier, and the armor is not very good as well. Moving on from there, you get the AMX M445. And then the next step is the AMX 50-100, the 50-120 and the 50B. Those are all equipped with an autoloader, which makes sure that you can do a lot of damage in a very short time. So you can do a lot of damage with the guns, but you have to play them like big medium tanks, because the profile of these tanks is quite big, but in mobility and armor, those are just medium tanks. You will have to change your playstyle continuously in this French tech tree, so it's not a good place to start as well. So then we come to the German tech tree. The Germans are well known for having the best guns in the game. And of course they have a lot of tanks that are well known, like the Marder 2, the Hetzer, the Stug, Nashorn, the Tiger 1 and 2, the King Tiger, the Panther 1 and 2. The tanks at tier 10 didn't make it beyond the prototype stage most of the time, like the Maus, the E100, the E50M. A lot of people just got into this game because they wanted to drive a Tiger tank. And while I can imagine that, these are not the easiest tank to play with. The armor is very straight, it doesn't have any slopes, so you might be very easily penetrated. These German tanks get damaged and destroyed easily, especially the lower tier tanks. So while they do have the best guns with the best accuracy and the best penetration values, I wouldn't recommend Germany to start with. A better choice in my opinion, and not just my opinion, would be the UK. The UK has got some nice tanks up here. These are very slow, but have very good armor. As is the same with this line here, the Matilda, the Churchills, Black Prince. Those are very well armored, and the guns are really known for having high DPM. What you have to consider though is that these tanks are slow, especially Matilda, Churchill, Churchill 7 and the Black Prince, and the 82, 88, 87, 80, 15 and Tortoise. Those are really slow tanks. So if you go to one side of the map and you see that you're needed on the other side of the map, you might not make it in time to go when you're needed. So a little more tactical insight comes in handy when you play the British tech tree. The medium tanks up here though are really quick and have good firing guns as well. This Cromwell has got the same gun as the Top Gun on a Churchill 1, and that's a very good gun. Then there's the American tech tree, and if there's two countries I can recommend you to start with, it's the Americans and the Russians. The Americans are known as the jack of all trades. They don't really excel in anything, but they don't have really big weaknesses as well. So the Germans are well known for having the best guns with the best accuracy and the best penetration values. This allows for them to shoot from afar and hit the target every time they shoot. If they come closer though, they might be destroyed very quickly because of the bad armor. The Chinese and the Russians is the other way around. They have very good armor values and have very inaccurate guns, but they do have very high alpha damage. So they are very well suited for close quarter combat. If you have a Chinese tank or a Russian tank from a distance, with their inaccurate guns and low penetration values, you might not do a lot of damage in those tanks. So while they're very strong on one end, they're weak on the other. With the Americans it's not like that. They don't excel at one thing, but they're not bad at another as well. So if you drive the American tanks, you can use them for anything. You can shoot from a distance, you can shoot from close by. You have reasonable armor, making close quarter combat really easy and doable. Though when the fight develops a little slower and you fire from distances, you will still be able to hit a lot of targets with the American guns. And of course the Americans do have some very well-known tanks as well from the Second World War, like the M8A1, the Wolverine, Hellcat, the Jackson tank destroyers, all very well known in the Second World War. And then there's the medium tank line here, the M3 Lee, which was used in Northern Africa, the M4 Sherman, and some developments of the M4 Sherman like the EZ8 and the Sherman Jumbo. And when you move on you can get to the Pershing tank or the Patton tank. Really well done tanks as well and really nice to play with them. So then we come to the Russians, and the Russians are built for close quarter combat. Even the tank destroyers, though mainly built for longer distance fire support, they are built differently than the tank destroyers of other countries. Their guns are less accurate and have higher alpha damage than the rest of the countries. Overall these tanks are really good at close quarter combat, but it's not a problem to take them out into an open field as well. Because of their armor they can take quite a punishment. And as you can see, this was the country I started with. I'm at tier 8 with the ISU 152. I'm still saving money to get the SU 101, and I've got the KV4. And that's how far I have progressed. I think this is a really good country to start with, and if I would name two countries to start with, it would be the Russians or the Americans. So then at last we come to the Japanese tech tree. The Japanese tech tree has two choices to start with, either the light tank line or the medium tank line. Those meet at tier 5 at the medium tank line, and it's medium tanks all the way up to tier 10. The Japanese have good guns with relatively high penetration values, good damage values and a good accuracy. The good gun depression helps you to get shots off at the enemy from positions that other tanks would just not be able to get shots off. But the downside of these Japanese tanks is that, first of all, they're not very maneuverable and they're very big. And since they're very big, you've got big targets and the armor isn't very good, so you might be spotted easily and killed easily. Japanese tanks are mainly built for a supporting role as a second line tank. Certainly not made for close quarter combat. Firing from a second line is where these Japanese tanks excel in. But being able to hide your tank well, getting shots at from afar, that's a skill you have to develop in the game. And for that reason, I don't think Japanese is a good place to start. And that concludes this first episode. I hope to see you in the next. For now, have fun playing the game.